of us at this stage.
Yeah, that's the ironic thing. You're the healthiest.
All right. Well, listen, I dedicate this shoot to all of us, the cholim of Klal Yisrael, the broken or fractured ribs, the broken nose, the Pesach that have been rendered lame from fibromyalgia, and the colon bleeding escapade. Who's in the background? It's Dina. I can hear it loud and clear. All right, I'm going to mute you. No problem. I wish you all better. Kevin, teach us.
Okay, I've just found something that it's Pesach. Let's just, I found something on Chabad, from the Chabad website, and it says here, the customs observed during the days of Nisan, which is now. And, okay, so it says here, we're in the month of Nisan, which is, okay. It says here, from Purim onwards, one should expound the laws of Pesach, so people should learn about Pesach up till obviously the Chag. And then after Pesach, you start learning the Shavuot, and after Shavuot, from Elul, you learn the laws of Sukkot. Okay, it says here also, so I just had, okay, there we go. The laws of Pesach on the Shabbos preceding Pesach, you do the it's called Shabbat Hagadol, which means the big Shabbos. Why that's called Shabbat Hagadol, and why isn't Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah called Shabbat Hagadol? I just thought of that. Damon, any idea why is it called Shabbat Hagadol and not Lifnei Rosh Hashanah or Lifnei Yom Kippur?
I have no idea. Teach us.
I'm just thinking, how's that for a question, guys? Arthur, what do you think? Anyway, okay, so here we go. Let's see here. Okay, so
it took place on the 10th of Nisan, anyway, 5 days before the Exodus. I think it was the first Shabbos.
And it says here, okay, one more thing here. Sorry about that. I just found this a few minutes ago. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, talking about chometz. Okay, so we sold the chometz to a non-Jew. If a non-Jew, so even if you didn't sell your chometz to a non-Jew, I mean, you didn't fill in that form, he can come and rock up at your house and take whatever he wants, and you have no recourse against it. It says here, could it be that if one buried the chometz in the storage pit so it could no longer be seen or entrusted to a non-Jew, that he would not violate the prohibition against possessing chometz, since it is not visible for him throughout the days of Pesach? The Torah says, for 7 days no leaven shall be found in your home. Even if he buried it or entrusted it to another person, whether a non-Jew or a Jew, even if a person to the chometz was entrusted accepted responsibility for it, if it was stolen from him or if he lost it, he would be liable to reimburse the owner for the value of his chometz, in which instance the person to whom it was entrusted will also violate the prohibition against having chometz in his domain. Okay, so, well, having chometz in one's domain, if you locked it away and you marked your cupboards chometz, I think that doesn't apply to that. So anyway, anything to add to that?
No, thank you, my friend. All right, so
that was just a last minute thing. Anyway,
no problem. So we on 68b we're discussing that obviously Rav Elazar was saying that at the end of the day, once there's despair by the owner, the thief is liable for obviously the stolen object, the object that he stole. So Rav Yochanan doesn't agree with Rav Elazar because Rav Elazar says, look, there has to be a legitimate sale in order to effect acquisition and consummate the theft. What constitutes a legitimate sale? a despair by the original owner. That's the only way that that can occur. Rav Yochanan said it's not the case, if you remember, because he took the case of kidnapping as an example, that anybody that was kidnapped generally doesn't almost despair of themselves being rescued, and yet the kidnapper, if he sells this person, even though it's an illegal sale, for two reasons. A, the person being sold didn't agree to it, he never despaired. And secondly, because it's not a legitimate sale, you're not allowed to sell people. So if you used him in some way, sold him, even though it wasn't legal, or there was no despair by the person being kidnapped, we still give that thief the death penalty in that particular case. So too, Rav Yochanan is saying, especially even in a case where a thief who sells the stolen animal before despair is definitely liable to the fourfold and fivefold penalty. And this is a proof for it, because basically the fact of it is transgressed that pasuk in the Chumash. So we know that he does hold with respect to despair before. He does hold with respect to the fourfold or fivefold payment before the owner's despair. And we want to know, after the owner's despair, what does he hold? Does he hold that the thief is liable or not? So it says, the Gemara says that Rav Yochanan says explicitly, if the thief slaughters or sells the stolen animal after the owner's despair, it's the same as before the despair, he's still liable to the fourfold and fivefold payment, because Rabbi Akiva also calls it a sinning repeatedly. So apparently it's only when you either sell or slaughter the animal that liability occurs, but not if you just steal it. Otherwise, then you have to pay double. Then it's just the twofold payment. But Reish Lakish says after the owner's despair, he is not liable, but before the owner's despair, the thief is liable. So it might seem a bit counterintuitive. But the reason being is, let's just go through each of the explanations. Rav Yochanan said that he's liable because he maintains that the thief's liability to the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering or selling a stolen animal applies again, guys, both prior to the owner's despair and after the owner's despair, because it's such a grievous act and forbidden by the Chumash. Reish Lakish said he's not liable because he said, look, he maintains that a thief's liability to the fourfold and fivefold payment is specifically for slaughtering or selling the animal prior to the owner's despair. But the minute the owner despairs, through the despair, the thief acquires the animal. And therefore, it's the thief's own animal that he's slaughtering and his own animal that he's selling. Okay? That's why it deems after despair there is no four or fivefold payment, Reish Lakish. So Rav Yochanan brings a very interesting challenge to him from the following Mishnah in Bava Kamma 64b. Okay? And basically, that Mishnah states, if one stole an ox or a sheep and he consecrated it, and afterwards he slaughtered it, he pays the twofold payment. Okay? In other words, he pays the twofold payment to the original owner, as per Rashi's explanation. So although the twofold payment doesn't ordinarily apply to consecrated property, we learned that. It does apply in this case. Why? Because although the animal is now consecrated, it wasn't consecrated at the time of theft. So that's the critical moment in regard to the applicability of the penalty. So that's why there's a twofold payment, okay? And then the consecration came afterwards. But we learned that he does not pay the four or fivefold payment. Now, because when he slaughtered the animal, it had already been consecrated, and the four or fivefold penalty doesn't apply to a consecrated animal. How do we know this? If you look in Shemot in chapter 22, verse 8, the Torah states with respect to the twofold payment, he shall pay twofold to his fellow. So which teaches he has to pay the kefil payment, the penalty payment, only to his fellow Jew, but not to Hekdesh, not to anything that's consecrated. And since the Torah exempts him from the kefil payment, any sort of penalty payment, the kefil in this case is the principal, the compensatory amount plus one penalty amount, or any other penalty is exempted under the same basis. In other words, if, for example, you stole a consecrated animal, you only pay back originally what you stole, but not the twofold. The reason he pays twofold is he stole it from the person's house and then consecrated it, so he doesn't have to pay the penalty because witnesses haven't come yet. And the same token, if he doesn't have to pay the penalty in this case, for the fourfold or fivefold, he doesn't. When he slaughters or sells, when he slaughters the animal or sells it, because he's not anymore paying to his fellow. It was already consecrated, so it doesn't apply to Hekdesh. Okay, so let's just read in the verse to confirm exactly what we're saying here. So the Gemara wants to know. Okay, since he doesn't pay the four or fivefold payment, the Gemara is asking now, when did the thief consecrate and slaughter the animal? If you will say that he did so prior to the owner's despair, does the animal then become consecrated, guys?
Prior to the owner's despair,
Yeah.
can it become consecrated? I think I saw this. Is it no? Because there's an answer. It can't be consecrated if it's relating to the other. There's a limbo period or a limbo situation where it can't be consecrated by the owner or the thief. So is this what it's?
So
is this?
No.
You say no.
We're
No.
getting to that. You're correct in terms of the fact that you've done revision. I can see that, and I'm happy. I'm going to show you where that applies. What we're saying is now, if the original owner didn't despair of getting it back,
He can.
Well, if he hadn't at that point, in other words, it's saying, if you will say that he did so prior to the owner's despair, the animal can never become consecrated because it's not the thief. In other words,
still belongs to the owner because he has despaired of it. It's
correct,
still his property.
correct. So why? So it says why the merciful one says in his Torah, and if you want to know the pasuk, it's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 14. If a man consecrates his house to be holy. So this is teaching that one can only consecrate something similar to his house. What is a house is? It's yours. Okay, so anything that is yours, you can consecrate. But anything that you take that's not yours can't be consecrated, just by default. So the thief's consecration of the stolen animal prior to the owner's despair does not take effect, basically. So rather, it's obvious that the Mishnah must refer to where the thief consecrated and slaughtered the animal after the owner's despair. So what happened here? The thief stole it at the homeowner's home, waited for despair, a reasonable amount of time for despair to kick in. And then at that point, he was able to consecrate it because of through the despair now owns it. And as evidence from the Mishnah, the only reason he doesn't pay the four or fivefold payment is that he consecrated the animal. So basically, when he's slaughtering the animal, and he's slaughtering an animal in order to give it to Hekdesh, it's part of the process, the slaughtering and the consecration. But if he slaughtered it for himself and his mates, and he decided to make biltong, he would pay the four or fivefold payment. Okay? Now, this is a direct argument against Reish Lakish, because it says, and if it should enter your mind to say, as Reish Lakish did say, that despair alone affects acquisition, then why does he pay? Because it's his own animal that he's slaughtering, his own animal that he's selling. So what it's saying is, Rav Yochanan was very clever. He brought this Mishnah to prove that if in fact, through the original owner's despair, the thief acquires the animal and is slaughtering or selling it, and therefore there's no four or fivefold payment. When Rav Yochanan brought this Mishnah, he said, look, it can't happen before the despair, because in that particular case, he can't consecrate something that hasn't been his. It can only become his if there's despair. And if there's despair, it's basically saying ordinarily he would have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. It's only because it's consecrated to Hekdesh and not stealing the animal of his fellow Jew that gets him off the hook for the 4 or 5-fold. And that's proving that despair alone does not affect acquisition, because if despair did affect acquisition, then whether he consecrated it to Hekdesh or he kept it for himself and ate it with him and his mates, he wouldn't have to pay the 4 or 5-fold. So this is a proof that Rav Yochanan uses against Reish Lakish. It's a solid proof. Okay, do you all understand? Not if you do before going on? Not? Okay, just move your little nose off. I know you can't move your ribs. Okay, cool. So, now Reish Lakish is answering, and he says, Rav Yochanan, what are we dealing with here? In a case where the original owner, rather than the thief, consecrated it while it was in possession of the thief. So this should strike you as a little bit weird, because firstly, the owner hasn't despaired of recovering it. Okay, so it doesn't belong to the thief, so that's fine. So there was no despair through which the animal would be acquired by the thief. And were it not for the fact that the animal is consecrated, the thief would be liable for slaughtering the animal that is not his. So in other words, Reish Lakish interprets the Mishnah to mean if one stole and he consecrated, and he doesn't translate and he consecrated to meaning the thief consecrated it. He's saying the owner consecrated it, and then the thief, slaughtered, he pays the 2-fold, but he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So this should confuse you on 1 or 2 different levels. The first level that you should feel a little bit confused, you can say, hang on a second. How can someone, he doesn't despair of getting his animal back, but how can you consecrate something that's not in your possession? You don't have it to consecrate. You don't have it to sell. You don't have it to consecrate. You don't control it. You might own it, but if it ain't yours and you can't use it, what can you really do with it on a practical level? So he's saying that, look, the original owner didn't despair. You want to say he despaired. I'm saying he didn't despair. But you're saying that the reason why we have to say he despaired is that's the only way the thief could have consecrated it as his own animal. And what Reish Lakish is saying is he's saying the original owner didn't despair, and I'm saying the original owner consecrated the animal. So we ask then, how was it stolen if it's consecrated? I mean, how can you consecrate something that is stolen? So indeed, Reish Lakish does say it's stolen, but the original owner can nevertheless consecrate it. So now we've got to find out how this is possible. So, because the Gemara says, but does then the animal actually become consecrated? Because we remember the words of Rav Yochanan, and this is what Kevin was talking about. So he was spot on. If a thief stole some property and the owner did not yet despair of recovering it, neither of them, neither the thief nor the owner, can consecrate it. Why? Because the thief cannot consecrate it because it's not his, since the original owner did not despair, and the owner cannot consecrate it because it's not in his possession, meaning he's got, in practice, how can he control something that's not in his possession? So exactly as Kevin remembered. Kevin, well done, but very, very well done. So that's the question that Rav Yochanan has on Reish Lakish's explanation of how of how he answered it. Does that make sense? So again, Reish Lakish's defense is that the original owner didn't despair. The thief took it. It doesn't belong to the thief. The original owner consecrated it through some method, and therefore he would still be eligible to the full 5-fold payment if it was not for the. That's how he would answer this case of Hekdesh. That the reason why he's paying the 4 or 5-fold is because it's not actually his to consecrate, but he still stole it. And therefore, when he slaughtered it, there's an issue. Okay. So, the Gemara says that Reish Lakish defends his explanation in accordance with the discrete ones. So we're going to learn about these discrete ones. What does it mean, etc. Okay. So we learned in the Mishnah, and it's actually in Ma'aser Sheni chapter 5 verse 1, with regard to Kerem Revei. Does everybody know what Kerem Revei is? Kev?
It's a type of it's like a type of produce, or it's a measurement.
Okay, good. It's a type of produce. So do you know, like I remember my brother with his children, all the 3 boys wouldn't get a haircut until they turned 3.
Optionus.
Upshirin, yeah, it's generally a Hasidic thing, but a lot of Misnagdisha people have adopted it. But basically, where it comes from is this concept of Kerem Revei. So basically, it's a vineyard in its 4th year. So during the first 3 years of its growth, the produce of a grapevine or other trees, we use the word olah to describe an orchard, it's prohibited for any use. Where's that? In Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 19, verse 23. So basically, the produce of the vine is in its 4th year. Revei, I'm sure it comes from the word revi, and it basically, exactly as Kevin says, has the same sanctity as Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithing. And it can only be eaten in Jerusalem. So basically, in the same manner as Ma'aser Sheni, the Revei produce can be deconsecrated onto coins and be eaten outside Jerusalem, while the redemption coins are taken to Jerusalem and used to purchase food that is eaten there. So say, for example, like you're in Babylon, okay? Well, okay, let's just say you're in the north, you're in Sfat or whatever the case may be, and it's very arduous to go all the way to Jerusalem in order just to eat this a bit of the produce. So what you would do is you would place the sanctity on the coins in lieu of the sanctity of the grapes, and those coins would be taken to Jerusalem, at which produce would be bought there and consumed there by somebody that is acting on your behalf. Does that make sense? So in other words, that actual item of produce is deconsecrated of holiness and transferred to coins. Okay. So what does this have to do with the discrete ones? So what happened is when we learned this in the Mishnah, the discrete ones place down coins and say whatever was picked from this vineyard shall be deconsecrated on these coins. So what was the situation is that there were very, very religious, pious people who didn't want other people to sin. Many people that would steal this sort of produce, firstly, wouldn't know that it's in its 4th year and wouldn't know that they're committing the sin of eating something which was prohibited, and that was just stole. So these pious people didn't want theft to be on these people's hands because many of them were poor. It wasn't just theft for the sake of theft. Not that there's an excuse, but poverty does drive these things. And that the pious people wished to prevent other people from sinning and had taken a 4th year vineyard. They were basically concerned that passerbys might eat the grapes outside Jerusalem without redeeming them. So they would actually place down coins in the evening, and they'd say any people that picked the fruit today should be redeemed with these coins. In other words, those coins were in lieu of produce that was going to be consumed by poor, desperate people that stole them, so that they shouldn't be labeled with the sin of eating outside Jerusalem something holy that was only for use in Jerusalem, nor would they be responsible for theft. They were known as the discreet ones because they did their mitzvahs discreetly. So evidently they maintain that although the grapes stolen by passerby aren't in their possession any longer, the ownership is not considered impaired, and they remain full-fledged owners who are still empowered to redeem the fruits and transfer their sanctity onto the coins that are set aside. Okay, so now you can see how Reish Lakish gets his example from. Because Rav Yochanan says, look, if something is stolen from you, but you don't give up hope of finding it, it doesn't belong to the thief because you haven't, despaired. And it doesn't belong to you because the thief actually has it in his possession. So how can you consecrate it? And Reish Lakish says, look at the Mishnah on Ma'aser Sheni, chapter 5, verse 1, with the discreet ones. So what happened was poor people took items that were not allowed for use the first 3 years. In the fourth year, it could only be used once it was taken to Jerusalem and eaten there, unless it was redeemed in coins. So what happens is the thief had already stolen the grapes, etc., the poor thieves. They weren't just thieves, they were desperate for food. And then what happened was the people that really owned the grapes didn't want these people to sin with both theft and transgressing, eating it out of the land of Jerusalem. So in that particular case, they said, we're using these coins in lieu of the grapes that were taken, and the sanctity is on these coins. We'll take them to Jerusalem, we'll buy produce there and eat it there. So this is a proof to Reish Lakish that the item doesn't have to be in your possession in order for you to control it and make it hekdesh, consecrated, because it was consecrated coins as a result of deconsecrating the actual produce itself. Am I making sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty straightforward so far, nothing that complicated. Wait till we get to the complicated stuff. Okay, so the Gemara asked Reish Lakish the following. He said, look, if the Mishnah refers to where the owner consecrated the animal, why does its rule state that the thief pays the twofold payment, while the principle has been returned to the owner? In other words, since the owner's consecration takes effect, the animal is in the possession of hekdesh, because that's what the owner willed anyway. So it's considered returned to the owner. And you all know that that exempts the thief from the twofold penalty. Why? Because basically the Torah prescribes any sort of knas, penalty, whether it's a twofold payment, the careful only, etc., or the 4 or 5-fold, and it prescribes it if it's found in possession of the thief, number one, but in this case it's not, it's in possession of the temple. And then witnesses come when the stolen article is removed from the thief's possession through the testimony of witnesses, and witnesses have to come. So in Shemot chapter 22, verse 3, it says, if being found, will it be found the stolen article through witnesses in his hand? In whose hand? The thief's hand. But it's not in the thief's hand, because it belongs to Hekdesh. So the Gemara is asking, if Reish Lakish is right, why does the thief pay twofold to the original owner? Since the original owner wanted it to go to Hekdesh, it's returned back to Hekdesh. No harm done. No witnesses have come. It's all been returned, and it's no longer in the thief's hand. It's not like he was caught by witnesses red-handed, as the term goes. Does that make sense? So the answer to that Gemara is that it's saying, look, the Gemara answers, the Mishnah refers to where the thief had been sued in court prior to the owner's consecration. So what happens is the original owner is a very good holy man, and but in the interim, he basically the witnesses saw the thief take it from the original owner's home. They go to the owner, they make a big fuss in public. So now it does come to court. And then by the time it comes to court, the court instructs him with witnesses that he has to pay it back. But because he's a thief, he pays back double, because if a thief pays back without witnesses coming and says, listen, I feel bad, I stole it, he only has to give back what he stole. He doesn't have to pay double. It's only when he troubles the court and witnesses come against him that double penalty is enacted. Does that make sense? And in this case, it was. So that's what was explained, that he sued in court prior to the owner's consecration. In other words, the owner did consecrate it in order that he might not be valid to pay the 4 or 5-fold, but it already went to court, and the guy didn't come clean, and there were witnesses, and the legal process has already gone through. So what's the case? If the judges say go pay him, then why did the Tanna discuss the case in which he consecrated the stolen animal? Even if he did not consecrate the animal, we should also not be able to make the thief liable to the 4-fold and 5-fold. For Rava said, if the court said to the thief, go pay him, so when the court says go pay him, it's basically rendered a verdict saying an instruction to repay. And then the thief slaughtered or sold the ox or sheep that he stolen, he is not liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. What's the reason? Since they issued the final verdict on the matter and then slaughtered or sold the animal, he's doing so as a robber then as a thief. So I just want to explain to you what this actually means, and a robber does not pay the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. Okay. So once the court establishes through its final verdict that the animal in his possession belongs to the original owner. Guys, one of you, your mic is not on. Gavin, are you with me?
Martha is.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's just noise coming from your computer. Gav.
Sorry, I dropped something.
Okay, are you with me, Butchie? All right. So what we say is, why is it a case? Did you hear the last thing or not really? Be honest.
No. I missed the last thing. I'm just had something to. I had to pick it up. Sorry, otherwise I can't hear properly.
No problem at all. Okay, so the Gemara says, what's the case? If the judge, in other words, the whole reason why the thief has to pay twice, even though he's returned it to Hekdesh and the original owner gave it to Hekdesh, even though the thief had it, it's returned to the owner. He should only have to pay. He shouldn't have to pay the 2-fold. But the Mishnah is saying it's already gone to court because there were witnesses. So the Gemara asks, let's see what the case is. If the judges say go pay him, means there's a final verdict, and then he consecrated the stolen animal. So even if he didn't consecrate the animal, we shouldn't be able to make the thief liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. Because Rava said, if the court said to the thief, go pay him, in other words, the verdict was given, and the thief slaughtered or sold the ox or sheep that he stolen at that point, he's not liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. What's the reason? Since they issued a final verdict on the matter, and then he slaughtered or sold the animal, he's doing so as a robber rather than a thief, and a robber does not pay the 4-fold or 5-fold penalty. So all it's saying is once the court establishes through its final verdict that the animal in his possession belongs to the original owner, his original act of theft by the courts is considered terminated. And basically, the stolen animal is viewed as a deposit that the thief has to return to the original owner. That's according to the Ravad. Okay? So therefore, he has to give that back to the original owner, and he then has to give the penalty of the same amount. But when he subsequently slaughters or sells the animal, he's engaging in a new act of robbery. It's not considered theft, because theft is when you don't know who stole from him. But here the original owner does know who stole from him because there's a whole court case. So again, in other words, the first matter of theft was terminated. There was a 2-fold payment. Okay, so he has to give back the animal as the original deposit back and then pay the same financial equivalent. Okay, either in an animal or money, but then he goes and slaughters the animals or sells it. So why does he pay the 4-fold or 5-fold? Because that legal matter is terminated and the animal in his possession is known as a holding deposit, which he has to, in the previous legal case, give back to the original owner. And since that's the case, the original owner now knows who stole from him because the witnesses came. And since he knows he stole from him, when that thief now slaughters or sells the animal, it's not an act of theft, because theft is when you don't know who took from you. It's a case of robbery. And you only have to pay back originally what you took in a case of robbery, but not the 4 or 5-fold payment. Does that make sense? He's only eligible to pay back the original amount plus the penalty. Now, if he's considered a robber, why would he have to pay a penalty? Because he's paying a penalty based on that first legal case at which he was a thief and the original owner didn't know who he was, and witnesses came to testify, but that matter's been concluded. At the moment, he's now holding on to that item as a robber because his identity is known, and therefore there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. There might be, because he's holding on to this, another payment in terms of a compensatory amount as another legal case. That's possible. All right, guys, we're going to end off on this note. It's getting dark here and the power has...
Damon?
Yeah?
Well, you've got 3 minutes left. So just to go back, what you said about it, is it because a robber has no fear? That's why he only pays a 2-fold payment, and the thief pays the 5-fold.
No.
Does a robber have no fear of consequences? Is that one of the main reasons?
No. So a robber never pays a 2-fold. He only pays originally what he took. And the reason being, is he doesn't fear Hashem, he doesn't fear people, he's a lunatic. He basically isn't seen as bad a light as a thief, because a thief is scared of a people's opinion of him, but doesn't mind stealing when Hashem knows he stole. So he's more afraid of people than Hashem's opinion, which Hashem finds abhorrent.
Okay.
And since a robber is so clueless in terms of anybody's opinion, he's not deemed especially insulting to Hashem, and therefore only has to return what he stole with a financial.
He's brazen. He's brazen about it. Jeez, it's getting dark there, Damon. So, okay, so he only compensates basically. The robber just pays back what he took. The value for the... Jeez.
Yeah.
Cash for doing the show, Damon. Gee whiz, eh? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Guys, I wish you all feel better. We all like the old and the wrecked. The ship. Like the Titanic.
We wrecked without having a drink. Without even drinking, we wrecked. Eh?
We wrecked, eh?
But please God, we all get back to normal, back to normal health ASAP.
Amen.
Amen.
I wish you all better, guys.
All right, guys. Yeah, cheers. Have a good evening.